Hello. This is, it looks like the sort of final, uh, comprehensive look at all of the mechanics in the game and seeing if everything is working as projected. And it looks like everything is. I'm having a weird problem where the game is slower on my system at home, which I'm sure is common for a lot of people, but my system is actually much nicer and much more fine-tuned than the ones at school, and it's still weird. So, but everything works. I will show you all of the things now so that you don't have to listen to me go through each mechanic slowly. Let's let it go ahead and run here. So we've got movement left and right. He does turn. It's all good. He's got a little duck there. When he ducks, he can still walk, but he cannot shift run, which is this movement here. And there is a little bit of a pickup there. He does accelerate up to his maximum speed kind of quickly, but it's not like if you press shift, you can see if you're tapping it, you can see he's got a little acceleration as opposed to just an instant change in his speed, which I like more. But when he's ducking, if I press shift, it doesn't allow me to sprint, which I think is more in the vein of the classic platformer thing. So we've got that. We've got a jump. Nice little jump. Dandy jump. He's got a double jump. And my keyboard is quite loud, so you can hear me tapping the space bar. He can only jump twice in the air. He can't jump any more than that. Once he gets grounded again, then he gets his double jump back. So let's see, what else do we need to do? We've got our enemies. This guy is patrolling rather nicely back and forth. If I get into the window, he won't see me if he's looking away from me. If he sees me, he'll run at me. And he actually will... we're sort of on a little... We're in a little pit here, but he will do a chase for a very long time. And depending on which direction he is inside of his patrol, he won't turn around and try to go back the wrong way when his patrol recontinues. He'll go back to going left if he's going left, and he'll go back to going right if he's going right, which is good. Okay, so what else do we have here? We have our coins up there, and we have our health, although you can't see it, but I will show it to you now. The bullet prefab thing in my game is slightly different from that in from other games. The only enemies that can shoot, or the only thing that can shoot in this game, are the enemies. Ooh, he got me. He turned me orange. Oh, we need to have that bullet. We need to have that bullet go away when it hits a wall. I thought I had that in there, but I guess not. And instead of doing what he does when he chases you, instead he shoots at me. He's got a little gun there, and that's fun. So let's go back to the beginning here. We've got our little brick here. This is our breakable brick. Now, mine doesn't break if it's made in contact with anything at all, and I can even use it as ground. I can jump off of it. But for me, I have this guy has a special weapon. He has a nunchuck. Nice. And it's pretty cool, and actually this is running much faster than it was before. Before, the nunchuck was slower than it was at school. Now it's running very fast. And it'll be on one side of his body, because he's only using it with one hand. So it's in the front here, it's on the back over here. I like that. I think that's cool. But it's the only way to break these bricks. So if he jumps up and smacks the brick, goes to pieces. And actually, we can't interact with the broken brick pieces. So if I break that brick and try to stand on the box that the collision is detecting with, it won't let you stand on it anymore. So we got our little spinny coin here, and up here in the corner, you can see the coins count. I only have one coin in here, but it would work with as many coins as I had in the scene. Jump up, collect it, it disappears, counts the coins up to being 1, and it will persist between scenes, which is good. Now, in the sort of standard version of this game, I would jump down, shoot the enemy, he would go swoop, whoop, whoop, and fall away and disappear. But instead, I've got my nunchuck, I smack him, and he actually goes flying off the edge one way or the other. It actually depends on which direction I'm hitting him from, and I think that's only because the nunchuck is put to one side or the other of my body, which is awesome. So that's cool. Now this guy up here, he's kind of hard to get to because, yeah, he'll shoot me as soon as he sees me, and it will always do 1 damage. If I take 1 more damage, I'll be killed. So, ooh, right back to the beginning. Brutal. So what I have instead is I can go up there and hit him with the nunchuck and he'll die, just like the purple guy did. But instead, I have a super cool mechanic where if he shoots at me, bing, I can knock the bullet back onto him. And he actually had a little bit of didn't realize he was dead there for a second, but he did fall over and die. And that's pretty great. So the only other mechanics that we have, we'll get up, I think my moving platform is way up ahead, but I have a little ladder here, and the nice thing about the ladder is the ladder won't be activated unless I guess I could show you the other things. So we have, before I use the ladder, I have my double jump, but I also have a wall jump that allows me to do a jump off of the ground, a jump off of the wall, and then another double jump in the air. So he can actually get 3 boosts, depending on if there's a piece of wall in front of him. And it will always bounce him off the right way. You do lose a little bit of control when he goes firing forward like that, but it's cool because you can do this sort of thing where you sort of do it, where he does a little sort of Mega Man-y thing there. So the ladder doesn't work unless the vertical axis is not 0. So once I start climbing the ladder, then I'm climbing the ladder, and I can let go of all the buttons. And I'm on the ladder, and that's fine. Once I get to the top, I can jump off. And if I duck when I'm going on the ladder, before I get on the ladder, then I'll be ducking on the ladder. If I'm just on the ladder and I go down and up, then it doesn't duck, which, there's not a whole lot I can do about not being able to duck before I get to the ladder, because it changes my shape before it puts that thing on. So then we've got this little bit of platform that looks different from everything else, and this is actually ice. So I do a little glide when I run and stop. And it's more of a glide to stopping, depending on how fast I'm going. I actually have much more pickup on the ground here than I do on the ice, because it's hard to get traction to start going, and it's hard to stop when it's time to stop. So that's cool. Now, somewhere up here is my moving platform. Yeah, here we go. This guy lets me stand on him. I can I guess I haven't tagged this one as ground yet because I can't jump off of him, but I can normally jump off of him. But I just made that one a little bit more recently. I just need to change the tag, and it will let me jump off of him just like I do with the breakable brick. But at any rate, cool beans. Oh, I guess there's one other mechanic to show you, and that's the kill boxes. So instead of just being hurt if I fall off a pit, then I go back to the beginning, which is good. So yeah, if you are fighting this video and you're not the professor of the course that's teaching this class, I'll show you all of the scripts in turn here. If you'd like to see them, stick around. If you are specifically Marty Clayton, then you're free to go, unless you also want to go back and look at this stuff, since it's on the internet forever. So here is my movement script, and the movement script is pretty basic, but it does a lot of checks because it wants to see first if there's an on ladder bool that's being checked as on. If it does, then we've got this whole thing set up so that you can still move off the ladder by having horizontal movement, and there's some vertical movement. And then it does the rest of the normal things where it gets the movement variable, setting it from move speed times the horizontal axis, and that's your movement variable. And then it creates that and keeps the velocity of whether you're jumping in the air, sets that to the velocity of the player. And if you're on ice, what it does is instead it does a move towards from the end velocity to from what the beginning beginning velocity is. So it's not a instant shift from this velocity to this velocity. It's a slow transition. That's why the ice works both for speeding up and slowing down. We have, this is my gradual slowdown from when I'm letting off of the shift key, which is my run key. For me, I have fire 3 because I want the controls to also work on a controller or wherever. So I never use like an actual key press. That's my alarm telling me to push something to get. So we never use an actual key press. I always use an output and input because I want the controller buttons to work. And that is my little gradual slow there. This is my crouch. And my crouch is doing a thing where it first checks to see if it's on a ladder. And if it's not, then it gets the vertical axis, checks if it's greater or false. It will change the crouching to true or false. This is just a bool for making it so that we can determine how things move when the guy's crouching. But really the only thing that's happening here is either the vertical axis is, greater than -1 or less than 0, and it will show up as either cutting it in half, setting the Y scale to normal, and it will also have setting the move speed to default move speed this way so that you can't run while you're crouching. So that's nice. And my crouch is based on scale. My shift to run is over here. It's got to hold on the shift key or the fire 3 key. It gets the variables and does a little calculation here, and then it either sets it to move speed here if this move speed plus increment value is not the max speed, and if it is the max speed, then it sets the variable up here. And I actually have in some of these graphs I have some redundancies just so that it's clearer what's going on. You could just connect these directly to this thing, but yeah. So here's my reverse. I did my utmost to never use -x scale because I know it creates chaos, and it actually simplifies things later when you want to determine which direction someone is facing, what direction they're moving according to their own local scale. So I use quaternions. We have an application variable that I use for all the stuff. We have 0 and we have 180, and it just will, depending on whether or not it's less than, their velocity is less than 0 or more than 0. Actually, I think it's less than or greater than 0 or equal to 0. If it's equal to 0, nothing happens. If it's greater than 0, it checks to see if that's true or false. If it's not, if it's true, and actually this should be greater than, or well, no, we've got an equal to, and we've got a greater than. So it works. It turns the guy. That's what happens. It's not too bad. I have my hurt script here now. I think every other person's scripts, they're using a state machine. I didn't even bother. I just kicked this out in no time at all because I wanted to do just a color change, and that's only changing one thing on the actual object that the script is on, as opposed to changing something in a HUD somewhere out in space. So we've got a custom argument for saying that or custom event that he's getting hurt. It checks to see. Well, first it takes his life and minuses 1 and sets that to being the case. Then it does a comparison for number 1. So if the life remaining is 1, there's only 3 things that it could be. Either it's greater than 1 down here, or it's less than 1. And if it's less than 1, then we do the respawn argument. We set the layer back to interacting with stuff. If it's not, so he doesn't get a chance to have his layer changed if he dies. It doesn't set him into invulnerability mode if he dies. But if he doesn't die, then it does set him into invulnerability mode, which is this layer 13. And then it checks to see if it's greater than 1. Then it's checking to see if it's true or false. So he's only got 3 lives. He's got 3 health, which is yellow health, which he can only get if he's respawned. So the respawn thing changes his color to yellow, and it also sets his life to the default life. So this is the respawn one up here. If it's if he gets hurt and his life is greater than 1, then it knows to change it to either yellow or red, and that's depending on whether or not the life remaining is greater than 1 or not. If it's not, then obviously it should be red, because that means it's equal to 1. And if it is greater than, then it should be 2, because there's no other way to get there, and that's orange. So that's all of it. Now, obviously, if I was going to do a thing where he got like heart containers, like Zelda style, we would have to redo all of this. But for the sake of the course, 3 health, red, yellow, orange. This is all very, it's very self-contained. It's very not generic. I understand that, but at any rate. What else does this guy have on him? He's got a thing where it sets his start point when he very first begins the game, which is, it just gets his position, sets the graph variable for him to start the starting position, and it sets him to yellow. So he gets set to yellow when he first spawns, he gets set to yellow when he respawns, right here. And then we've also got a checkpoint where if a checkpoint is activated, it will set the start position to the position of the player character. So that's nice and easy. Now my jump scripts are obviously fairly complicated, but the basics are the same. We've got a super unit that's pretty standard raycast, checking to see if it's ground. And I also have a super unit for the jump. And actually I can put this on anything, so that if I, for whatever reason, say, okay, well, if the enemy hits a springboard, he's going to do a jump too, then I can use this super unit to force an enemy to do a jump or whatever. And it just checks to see if he's on the ladder or if he's grounded. So in other words, you can still jump even if you're on the ladder, which, I don't know, maybe should be considered part of his grounded super unit, but I don't want to overcomplicate this little node, so it just checks one or the other. If it's true, then and he can air jump, then he can do a jump. And if, well, let's see, it says is grounded or showing false here. So this is if, let's see, how am I doing this? Because this is all twisted up for me. It's been a minute since I looked at the jump script. If he does one of these others, then this thing has to be true, and then it checks, and if one of those two is true, then it sets the variable that he can, as the set variable, that he can air jump if he needs to, and then it does the jump. The wall jump is slightly more complicated. It's actually two different. It's the same thing twice, but I thought this would make it easier to read, but it definitely doesn't. Where it's just doing a similar thing to the ground check, but it's a horizontal raycast, and then it has to actually suspend. It has to suspend the horizontal control for movement because he doesn't just want to hit the wall and go straight up. He wants to hit the wall and bounce off. And because our player controller is like grabbing the velocity of X all the time, we have to suspend it for a moment so that he can go boing. So that's what happens in here, and it's pretty convoluted. It also has a thing down here which it just does when the jump button is released, then it does a half a second timer, sets the wall jumping thing to not true anymore, and that makes the character have some control again. So if you hold down jump after you wall jump, which is not natural to do at all, then you won't get control back. But it's like I said, it's really not natural to do at all. You have to let the button up if you want to do another jump from bouncing wall to wall, or you want to jump in the air or whatever. So that works very well. I actually haven't had any problems with this. We probably could actually get rid of the up jump bit and just go straight to the timer after the jump every time, but then I would have to put it somewhere in here that would make sense. And then we have our little double jump, which just checks to see if there's an air jump variable that's true. If it is true, it sets it to false and then does another jump. When he hits the ground or he's on a ladder, it sets it back to true again. I think that's everything in the player controller script. Oh, I've got a gravity adjustment thing, and this should probably not be on the player controller, but it just takes the actual physics section of the entire game with the player in it and sets the gravity to a variable that I've set. And I personally like this better because I can change it in the variable section here. I think the gravity is negative 25 in my game. In, I think, the default, it's negative 9.81, and it makes everything feel very floaty. I don't know why they did that like that, but maybe it's because you're supposed to increase mass and angular torque or, stuff that I'm too dumb to understand. So let's see, what else do we got in our little game here? We have macros for the bullet. And actually, this is backwards, but for some reason I couldn't get the collision to work the other direction. Checks to see the bullet on collision, checks to see if it's an enemy. If it's true, then it sets the rigid body constraints of the enemy to none. It sets the layer to a layer that won't interact with anything, which is, I think it's called the exploded layer. It's just for the exploded bricks, but it also works for the enemies. It adds a certain amount of force to the enemy so that he goes wee in one direction or the other, and he actually gets pushed by the nunchuck a little bit, or the bullet, and then it destroys him after 3 seconds. So he's got a little bit of time to do his death throw, and then he falls over dead. And then it destroys the bullet. And actually, because of the order of operations here, it sends the destroy command on the enemy for 3 seconds. So the enemy lasts much longer than the bullet does, but then the bullet dies immediately upon contact. And then we've got this thing, which is the same thing for the player. It just checks to see if it's a player. If it is, it hurts the player. Pretty simple. I have this for my camera controller. I think that this is it's actually the same mechanic as what's happening with the ice. Only instead of moving towards per second the former velocity and the velocity that the game thinks you're supposed to be at. It's actually setting the velocity of the current position and the position that the camera thinks it's supposed to be at based on the position of the player. And it is finding the player. Through game object find, which I really hate to do, but I just felt like just for this case it would be fine because there's only one player ever in the game at one time. Now we actually have a separate thing in here where if it's a respawn, then the first time it does it, the first time that the game begins, it goes through this little motion, and the camera is sort of set to where the player is, so it doesn't drift over. But it used to be that if you died and the game respawned, you would die over here, the camera would be over here, the player would respawn over here, and the camera would just slowly pan back to where the player was. And in this case, if the player respawns, it'll go into this once chain. It'll reset it, so the first time it'll happen here, and the second time it'll go after here. And then actually this update, the first time that the game starts, it immediately sets the position of where the player is with the Y+2 so that the camera is offset a little bit. So the player's not in the dead center, he's at the bottom. But it sets this basically to after immediately. And then afterward it drifts around, and then if he ever has to respawn, it sets it back to once and then goes back to after again. So this is, I think, a really nice camera controller just for this particular kind of game. It drifts around. I'll show you because maybe that was one thing you didn't notice, but it drifts around a little bit. It's sort of more floaty from spot to spot. It's not so rigidly sticking to the player. You see, the player might go up and fall down, but you can see from the way that the ceiling is making contact with the top of the frame that it's sort of just behind the player a little bit on the y-axis. On the x-axis, it's exactly the same, but on the y-axis, it's sort of a little bit behind it. So the player isn't always at the bottom even when he's jumping. He'll go to the middle of the screen so that you can see where you're supposed to be landing. Does that make sense? So, yeah. And actually, maybe it should be even a little higher. Maybe it should be, instead of 100 or 10, it should be like 20 or 30. But I don't know. Those are variables we can tinker with when I actually create a level. So, okay, we've got some state machines. We've got chasing enemy and shooting enemy, and they're exactly the same, only the shooting enemy, when he is alive, he's got his patrols left and right. This is the right one. And the left one is actually exactly the same. So this is +2. The left one is +2 as well. The only distinction is when it goes to the right, it does another once script where it turns him around. And we could have had those transitions in here, and we do for when he turns, but between moving left and moving right, I think I have this thing set up just so that he does it on the first turn, or if he comes back to moving left from deciding direction, it turns him the correct way. So we have, these transitions where it checks to see his distance from, from where he's supposed to be. This distance variable is getting times by -1. It's getting local position, checking the x, and then it just moves true or false. And then it does set the variable for going right so that he can go back to the right place. If he transitions into chasing, it gets the variable for this, and then that triggers immediately so that it knows which direction to go. And on the so only if he's chasing and deciding to which direction to turn, it'll take him back to the direction he's supposed to go, rather than deciding the direction by just going straight back to right. And all the shooting thing is doing is this little instantiate script where it gets the position, it adds 2 to his x so that he doesn't hit himself with the bullet. It'll get the rotation from him, it'll get the position from him, and it'll instantiate the bullet. And then it does check to see if he's going right or left. So the script that's doing the patrol is also determining which direction the bullet is supposed to face. Because if he's going the other direction, we actually want to get his position and take, a minus on the x and instantiate it the other direction. And because it's getting his local rotation, the bullet, when it's instantiated, it always has the same force. It always goes forward. It doesn't have to decide which direction to go based on which direction he's going. Moving platform is pretty standard. We have an unoccupied state that's not that intense. We have a get parent thing so that it can parent the player to the appropriate object, not just something in the script that's called moving platform. And then if it happens to be that the player is a child of something else, or if an enemy is standing on a moving platform, which is okay, then it will make sure that the parent will be returned after they exit again. So it will set the variable back. And actually, I don't know, but I bet this would break if there was more than one object on a platform. Like, for instance, if an enemy and a player touched the platform and the enemy was second, then when the player, killed the enemy and it disabled the enemy, it would set the player back to being a child of the enemy's, empty game object, and then it would all go haywire. So that might need some rethought. But this one doesn't do a rotate. It just goes -2 and +2. It doesn't have a quaternion thing going on. So I thought better not break it since it works. It's a little on collision thing. There's my player controller. Here's my ladder script. It does a on trigger stay if the game object, and actually I think it doesn't really matter what it is, but in this case it has to have the vertical axis being not 0. So if it's going up or down, if you touch the ladder and you're not touching anything, if there's a ladder in the middle of a room and you jump through it, it's not going to interrupt you. It's not going to, as soon as you hit the thing, it's going to immediately take away your force and set you to not having gravity and then moving you up and down. Instead, it's only if you're pressing up and down while you're in the volume of the ladder, which I think is more like how Mega Man and those kinds of games are. So it checks that. It gets the rigid body of the component that interfered with it which is always a player, but it doesn't necessarily have to be. It really would just depend if you happen to be pressing up or down while an enemy was walking through a ladder volume. I guess you could break the gravity on the enemy that way, but you would just do game design, so that wouldn't really happen. But I would just, if it ever came up, I could just have a little tag check. Wouldn't be that big of a deal. But it just gets the gravity of the rigid body, sets it to 0, and then it sets this object variable for the game object, which is the player, for the on ladder to being true. That way, it doesn't play around with everything's gravity and everything's like maybe having this variable. It's just on the player, and then if it exits, it just sets it back to not true, and it turns the gravity back on. And that works for me. So let's see, what else do we have? Pretty simple kill box. We have this thing that I'm not using anymore. Here's my is grounded thing. Oh, here we go. This, I think, well, here's the hurt box. That's just like the kill box, only it does the argument of hurt. This is the ice. So all the ice is doing is checking to see if you're touching it and turning the Boolean on the object on and off, because all the stuff is in the player controller. So actually this would need to be adjusted if you wanted to have enemies that do that little like moving their feet too fast for being able to actually move forward on the ice. And if you had the animation that was matched up with how fast they would go on normal ground and it worked on the ice, it would work out of sync and it would look like they were slipping on the ice, and that would be pretty cool. But do a jump, coin reset. We have our coin script right here, which is pretty, they rotate and then it does do the coin count thing. It's pretty much exactly how you have it. And I guess that's it. That's the whole thing. That's all the mechanics. So now it's just a matter of doing some level layout, and then we'll just put together some fun stuff. Anyways, there's now talking in my living room. So I'll see you guys later. Thanks, guys.